the scope exercises, feel free to ask and I can go over them.
Yeah. How about this one on the screen? Could you just kind of go through the logic of this one for us, please?
Yeah, sure thing. Uh, so yeah, this problem is definitely tricky initially. It's a lot of different. It's a very. It's not a problem that you'll likely encounter often. It's just for illustrative purposes. In reality, you probably not want to do something like uh, this explicitly because it's pretty nested and confusing. But at the same time, it does serve a purpose uh, in terms of learning about scope. So let's just go through this example. So basically, we want. I'm gonna look at the README here. So we want to return full stack is on Earth. So we're getting from uh, the most broad to more and more specific with each step. And so right here we see that I think it helps to, I guess, work from either outside in or inside out. So let me think what would be probably the best way to approach this. Okay, so I think I'm gonna go inside out because let's see. Full stack HQ is the function that's called. I'm gonna go inside out because the innermost function has access to all of the outermost variables outside of its scope, but it doesn't work the same way where like within here, I don't have access to this or everything that's deeper in a deeper layer. I only have access to this variable within this function. So I want to go where I have the most information, which is like the deepest layer, and then I'll work my way out. So basically, let's see how we could approach this from that standpoint. So in here, if we called this innermost function, we should think of what that would return in this case. So first off, it would return full stack HQ is at, and then it would return place. And so how does it know what to use as place? Well, first it checks within its own scope. Right? So first it's going to look in its function here and look for a variable called place. And it can't find it because it doesn't exist inside of here. So then it would look one level out. And then it would look inside this function, inner function. So in this inner function, it's New York City. So then it would just be New York City instead of planet Earth. Like it would take this variable first. One thing I'd want to do, assuming that so we can change the variable names. So that means that I would want to change this because that's the first variable it's going to use when it gets called, when the innermost function gets called. So anybody want to guess what I should change this one to?
Would it be like place 4 maybe?
Or you mean the variable name? Yeah, you could call it place 4. I would even be more descriptive and maybe use like planet or something. Just because it tells you what it is, whereas place 4, it does make sense, but it's a little more vague, like what it actually means. So maybe planet, and then
Because you would want to maybe change the ones at the bottom too, where it says full stack is at
yeah,
place.
yeah, that makes sense. So we'll go one by one. So I would change this to planet, and then I could say, or actually it says you can only change the parameter and or variable name. So yeah, maybe I won't change that to planet. I'll just keep it city because if I can't change the value, then I'll just say New York City, and then I'll just keep this as planet, and then I'll put city here. So yeah, that is the uh, first thing I would do is call it city and then put city, and yeah, the what I was talking about before. I'll explain it a little further, like um, if we need to, but in this case we may not fully even need to, because if we just rename everything, it should just work. So we have city here, so we have that part of it down. Now we should look at the next variable that could potentially be used in this string, which is the parameter that gets passed to this function. And so now we need to look where this function is called, because that's what is going to set the value of that parameter. So inner function is called here, and it gets passed New York State as the parameter. So does anybody know what this could be renamed to be a little more clear?
State, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So we just rename this to state and then put state over here too, since we're in the innermost scope, so it has access to everything that's on an outer layer. And so this is an outer layer, so it has access to city, and then this is also a parameter that's outside of this parameter, so it has access to it. And so one thing I do want to mention about parameters, and it gets a little confusing because sometimes it can be confusing whether or not you have access to this parameter or not, but basically when a parameter is declared in the arguments parentheses, in between these parentheses of a function, we can essentially think of this as a variable declaration. So we could just think of this as like that. It's not actually happening, but maybe it's easier. It'll make things easier down the line if you think of every time you declare something. So let's say this is name, right? Then it's essentially the same as saying let name equals name, and then within the body of this function you have access to this variable as if it were being declared. This doesn't happen, but you could think of this as happening, where you take whatever's here and you just actually declare a variable that everything inside of it has access to. Which is why, like, if you name something a parameter, you can't declare, like, you can't say let state equals California or something, because I believe it'll throw an error, because this is already taken by this parameter. So we're almost
a lot easier, yeah.
Yeah. To think of it like that, I think it helped me a lot to just, whenever you have a parameter, just pretend it's declared within the body of the function. And then, so yeah, you have that, and then next level out is middle function. So we need to do the same thing, like, where is middle function called? Like, what's giving it its value, right? And so, does anyone? I mean, it's
country.
Yeah, exactly. We can go country, and then call this country. And then planet. There's nothing else other than this, so this will be planet. I think this should work. So yeah, the main takeaways here are everything that's at the deepest level has access to the outer layer variables. And you should also be descriptive with your names. That's another thing to keep in mind. All right. Are there any other questions on this particular question?
I just wanted to make sure I hope this was being recorded so we could have it for later. It is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks.
All right. Are there any other questions that people want to go over?
We'll go over the last problem, please.
The last problem?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let me see. All the tests are failing following the restrictions for each function. Fix the code so every test passes. For all the functions, you may not edit the line initially declaring each test message. Edit any code on the same line as the return keyword. Okay, it may be helpful to look at the values passed into these functions in the spec. Okay. Snipe cone spec.js. Alright, so it's saying do not declare any new variable with the let keyword. Okay. And then I guess we gotta figure out what's failing. So I'm gonna run it. The first one is test failing to equal test succeeding. Return value equals test1, test succeeding, but test1 is test failing here. So anyone have any guesses what I could do? I think the rules state that I could just change this value, right? Edit. Yeah, so I can't edit anything here, but I can edit here because it just says don't declare any new variable. So yeah, I think I would just put test succeeding, or yeah, test succeeding into this string because it's gonna use function, or wait, let me go back to the test. Yeah, I guess it passes it a parameter. So do not declare any new variable. I mean, you could do this, it would still work, but you could also like just do something like this.
Yeah.
Instead of changing this. Let's see. Because as you can see, it passes a parameter, so we could just say test1 message. And the point of this is to show that essentially this is, remember in the other test, I said it's the same thing as doing let test1 message equals test1 message. So this parameter declaration is the same thing as doing this. So, or like is kind of equivalent to declaring the variable inside the body. So again, functions in terms of finding which variables it has available to it inside its scope will look inside out. So it's going to first look for one within its own scope, and if it finds it, and it will find it if you pass it the parameter of the same name, then it's not going to use this one because it already found it, so it doesn't need to keep searching in the outer scopes. So I think this one will work. Okay, so we have one down. Does anybody have any questions about that? Which is why that would work?
What? But aren't we expecting test succeeding? Where does the succeed come from?
It comes from the test. Gets passed in right here. So they actually call the function with a parameter, but like in this, they never like set the parameter. So because they never set the parameter, when this function looks for this variable name, it won't find one within its own scope because it doesn't exist. So it'll use the global one because if a function can't find the value of a variable within its own scope, it'll look outside. It'll keep looking levels and levels outside, and so it finds one here, so it'll return this global one, as opposed to like when I say test1 message, it looks at this one, which is essentially the same thing as saying let test1 message equals test1 message. It's basically doing that when I set the parameter, and then basically we can see what test1 message is by looking at test1 and seeing that this parameter, this string gets passed in. So we have to initialize that variable, or else if we don't have anything and it passes something in, we have no way to use what just got passed in as the parameter. unless we declare a variable that will represent that parameter, the value of whatever gets passed in.
But here it says test failing though, so why is it not printing test failing instead of test?
It's not using this one.
Oh, I see. Okay. Oh, right. Okay, at the
It's it's
bottom.
it's,
Okay, I
it's
see. Never
using
mind.
it's using
Yeah.
this one because um
But that's test one, not test one message. Oh, this is test one.
yeah
Okay, I
yeah
see.
yeah yeah,
Okay.
it's confusing because you have to keep scrolling and stuff. Like they should probably have the test right next to it. But yeah, test one is a function that takes a parameter, and and in our function signature we didn't. And that's the thing about JavaScript is like, in other coding languages it'll tell you like, there'll be like a little error here and it'll say like, oh, like you're passing a parameter to a function that doesn't take any parameters. Like at least in the signature you because initially it was defined like this, right? And then like other languages might tell you like, oh, there's an error, or the editor, I guess it's whatever environment you're in, it'll pick up on that automatically and it'll say like, oh, like you declared a function that doesn't take any parameters, but then you gave it a parameter. So like it'll know that before you even try running your code, which is like pretty solid because it prevents errors and things like that. But yeah, the main point of this is just to show you that basically, even if you don't care about whatever just test failed or passed or whatever, the important concept here is like inside out. So if you have this test one message parameter, this return value is gonna use this one that gets passed in. It's not gonna use the outer one, even though they both have the same name. And theoretically, you could be pretty confused, like which one is it gonna use? Like, is it gonna use this one or is it gonna use this one? The answer is always it's gonna use the one that's closest to it, the one that is most localized within its own scope. And so that's like the main important concept to learn, rather than like passing the test specifically.
So David, if there was no value being passed in the bottom section where it says test succeeding.
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, you mean if this was just empty? Like this? Or is that what you meant? Maybe we lost that.
Yeah, would that just be undefined then?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I believe so, yes. It'll still use this one, but basically we're saying let test one message equals, yeah, it's essentially nothing's getting passed here, so I believe it will be undefined. Because even though you're not passing anything in, you're still declaring this variable. So you're still declaring it. You're just not setting it to anything. And so it'll still use the one that you declared because it still finds it within its scope. But it'll be undefined, I think. Yeah, undefined. That's a good question. And the reason it's undefined is because we're declaring it. So we're doing something like this, right? We're declaring it and we're setting it equal to whatever gets passed in. This is whatever gets passed in. But if nothing gets passed in, then it's not defined. And so it'll just be undefined. Like this value will be undefined versus a string that you passed in.
Okay, thank you. Because in the sniper scope, I think that was we established that yesterday, but I was a little confused why that was happening. But this helps to explain why it was.
Yeah, it's confusing. It's definitely confusing, but because you're passing nothing in here, you're essentially just kind of declaring it and then like not setting it equal to anything, and then you're just returning it. Yeah, because this happens when you actually pass something in here, when you're calling the function. So when you're calling test one, like David or something, when you're passing that in here, that's when this assignment is happening. But if you don't, before you pass anything in here, it'll look like this, like this declaration that is happening under the hood. and then once you pass something in, it actually does the sets equal to something, and then yeah. All right, so that's the first one. It's a great question, by the way. Where's test succeeding? All right. So do not change any code in the body of test 2. You can edit the helper function though. Okay. So what are we expecting here? We're expecting test failing to equal test succeeding. Okay, same thing. So right now, we gotta see what the test is actually doing. So it's saying test 2 it's just calling it with nothing. It's calling test 2 with nothing, and it's expecting that to be test succeeding. Okay. So it's calling this with nothing. Let's see what's happening right now. Let's walk through what's happening right now so that we can understand what's happening and why it's test failing. So right now, we call test 2, it calls helper function, which sets A to be test succeeding, and then returns A, but it never returns anything. It just calls it. So everything's happening localized within the helper function. So we return A, but if we never set the invocation of this function equal to anything, then we don't have that value outside of this scope of this function. So basically, we're calling it, but it's just producing a side effect. It's like, doing something on the side that we're not able to pull the output from. And then it returns test2 message, and it's going to look for test2 message within the scope of test2. So it's going to look here, it can't find anything, so it'll just use this global one. So yeah, do not change any code in the body of test2. You can edit the helper function though. Okay. So I would think because I can't change any return value, or I can't touch this at all, like I'm gonna have to I'm thinking that I'm gonna have to change the value of this within this function. If I can't change it directly, like I can mutate this outer one within this, and then and then the value of that will be changed because I'm calling this first. So if by calling this function I could somehow change this value, then I'll have the right value, because because otherwise I can't change what I'm returning, right? It says do not change any code in the body of test2, so I can't change what I'm returning. So if I can't change what I'm returning, I have to change whatever value this is somehow, like with a side effect. So yeah, any idea how I could change to this value in the body of this function?
So when you're calling test2 and then it calls helper function, can you look down? I thought you can only look up.
Yeah, it's looking up. Like within the body of this function, this is outside of it. So I have access to it. Like I can do stuff with test2 message within here, because test2 message is outside of the scope. So if it's outside, then you have access to it. So
just want to make test2 message equal to A.
Oh, yeah, that actually works really well. I was just gonna set it to test succeeding, but then I was like, wait, A is already test succeeding, so yeah, this should work. Yeah. All right, got 2 down. Again, this is like built to be tricky, so it's not really, it's not really important that you get the trick, but it's more important that you understand within the body of this function, I have access to everything outside of it. So I have access to this. So what's to stop me from reassigning it? like within here,
Oh, okay.
and that'll mutate this variable outside of it. When I reassign it, it'll affect this one, this variable. Well, it's not mutating the value, and we'll get into mutations later. It's just reassigning it. That's a better, more correct term than mutating. Any questions on this one? So essentially what's happening is test2 is being called. It's going to call helper function, and then it's going to set A to test succeeding, and then it's going to reassign test2 message, and then it's going to look for test2 message, and it's not within, there's no local test2 message, so it's going to look outside, and it finds this test2 message outside. So it's like, okay, I found you, and then I'm reassigning it to be the value of A, and then and then you return it, and then it returns A, but this is like insignificant, like you don't need this.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, if there's no other questions on this guy. Type only a single character in either test3 or get message. Okay, this is complicated. Let me see. And part of the reason why we like to keep things, local within functions and not do things like this is so that we avoid having to do stuff like this when we actually read someone else's code, because as you can see, it's a pretty inefficient way to try to understand what's going on. So there are some hard and fast rules where we try not to, if at all possible, leak things outside of scopes, because once you start doing that, you start getting all these side effects, and like I don't know, it just takes a long time to understand what's going on. So all right, function test3, we have get message, and we have test3, and let's see what test is failing. Expecting test failing equals, oh, I guess they're all the same. So right now what's happening is it calls test3 with true. Okay, so it calls this with true. So this is going to be true. So we could just say, let test3 message equals true, so we don't forget. And so it's going to run this. So it's going to say if test3 message, then test3 message is going to be test succeeding. So this is going to be test succeeding. And then it's going to say let message equals get message. Value is undefined, right? So there's nothing getting passed in for value. So it won't go into this. It'll go into here. Because nothing's getting passed in here. So how do I type a single character? I mean, I would think you could do something like this maybe. It's like if it's not, oh yeah, I could type it in test3, so, or get message. So if it's like opposite, then like it'll just like, before it wasn't going in here, so if I change it to the opposite, then it should go in here. But there's probably other ways too. Let me think if there's another way. Let message equals get message. Value. A single character. Yeah, so test3 message equals test succeeding. So we need this to happen for sure, because that's what's getting returned. Is test3 message, and so if we don't do this, then it won't ever be able to return test succeeding. So yeah, I would think just doing something like this. Let me see if it works. Test 2, oh,
Oh, like you expected.
yeah. Yeah. There's probably a different way that I'm not seeing, but I don't think that's important. I don't think that's the important thing to do in this, to get in this test, but it's more so like, okay, so when I return test 3 message from here, where is it getting that test 3 message? Well, basically it's gonna look within its own scope. It can't find it. So then it's gonna look in one level out and it's gonna find this. So, well, yeah, it's basically going to return this because that's where it'll pull the value from. It gets declared initially out here, but then it gets reassigned here and we have access to it locally here. So yeah, it's gonna pull in this value. But yeah, the important thing is like it moves inside out, like the outside scope is all available to the innermost scope of the innermost function. And you know, when you don't pass anything in here, when you don't pass anything that actually takes value, this value is falsy, meaning like it'll evaluate to false. It won't be false, it'll be undefined, but undefined when you put it into a conditional becomes false.
False. Yeah.
And so that's why it won't go into this conditional, even though we need it to go into the conditional. So it'll just automatically default out here because you're not passing anything in here, and therefore this value is undefined, and undefined is evaluates to false when it's placed within a conditional. Any questions on this guy?
I was wondering why do we need MSG and get message? Is we want it to run down and then go back up? Like
so basically what happens is this gets called first, and so it just runs line 29 first, and it'll go here and it'll reassign there, and then it'll run line 33, which will call get message, and then so it'll stop running this code here, it'll pause here, and then it'll start running here to get the value of this function. So it'll pause here and then it'll evaluate everything here, and then whatever it returns, whether it be, you know, line 38 or line 41, that's what gets interchanged with this variable, becomes the return value of this function call. So once this function returns, then it resumes, and then it just returns out here, and then we're done. So it really just evaluates top down, and then it stops here, and then once it, you know, calls a different function, then it starts evaluating top down in that function too. But it'll pause here. It'll pause until that function's done resolving. It'll pause, and then it'll go into this function, whatever function this name is denotes, and then it'll just start running top down from that function all the way until it hits a return, and then it'll stop, and then it'll basically resume top down the outer one, and then once we return here, we're done with the function. It's a little weird because it got defined below it, but
so is something going in within the parentheses of get message?
no. It's just undefined. Like, if you don't put anything in here, this will just be undefined. It'll just be like the value equals undefined, because you're not putting anything in here. So this just becomes undefined, meaning it doesn't really exist. There's no value for it.
Okay.
Yeah. You wouldn't really ever do this though in real life, so it's just like it's just like knowledge that it's like kind of like trivia knowledge, like, but in reality, like, you wouldn't do this. And usually, you know, when you're coding, you'll, like, this won't even be allowed. Like, it'll error before it even allows you to run the code, which is why, like, I guess, yeah, over the years, JavaScript has got a lot of improvements to it so that, you shouldn't be allowed to run this code, ideally, because this is gonna cause a bug. Like, you're not passing something in where you're expecting something to be passed in, so it's not really solid code. So I mean, a nice advancement. I'm not sure if JavaScript. I know TypeScript supports this, where it won't even like allow you to run your program until all these like errors are fixed, so that you'll never like. The idea being that you'll never release an application that has like these bugs in it, because you won't even be able to run it to like test it yourself. So it'll just throw these errors that you'll see in your editor once you start developing. And I'm not sure if JavaScript has support for stuff like this. I know TypeScript does, but it could, because it's really getting more and more advanced these days. But yeah, I mean, like, I guess conceptually, if you don't pass anything in here, then you're, again, when you declare a parameter of a function, you're essentially doing this. You're saying there's a variable called value, whatever you name this. So this could be called like bleh, and then you're essentially declaring a variable named bleh, right? It's the same thing. But if you don't pass, so when you pass something in here like 1, 2, 3, that's when this gets assigned to an actual value, or in this case it'd be a string, 1, 2, 3, right? But if you never pass anything, right? If you never pass anything, then bleh is just undefined. Like, you haven't declared its value, so it has no value, so it has no definition. There's nothing that you can say it is. Like, it has no identity, so it's just like a placeholder. And then so if you try to evaluate bleh, it'll be false, because bleh will be undefined, and undefined always evaluates to false inside conditional statements.
Got it.
Yeah. So it's definitely confusing, but if you think of it like this, like whenever you declare a parameter, you're essentially doing this. And then the only time that you will assign that parameter a value is when you actually pass a parameter into the function body. That's when the declaration happens. And obviously this may not be what's actually happening, like, because like there's a lot of optimizations, and like I don't know really how the engine works, but if you think of it like this, that's how it makes sense to me in terms of like what the values are at certain points in time. Any questions? And again, this is tricky. It's just meant to be like that. But I think if you understand the core takeaways, then the other stuff is more trivial. It's like, yeah, like you're good at like riddles, and it's, you might be like really, it's just like, yeah, it's not super important stuff to be able to solve these like little tricks, like to have these little tricks in your bag of tricks. But the important things are just what remains. Like, just understand what happens when you declare a parameter of a function. Like, try to understand what's happening when you do that. Also understand when you try to access a variable, like, where is it getting it from? Like, if that variable exists in multiple scopes, it's always going to use the one that's in the closest scope to it to assign, like, to use as that variable. And then if it can't find anything in its own local scope, it's going to look outside and outside and outside. It's going to keep going until it can't find it anymore. And if it can't go out far enough, then it'll just be undefined, because there's no value for it. Those are basically the important takeaways here. Not really like the riddle part. Wait, is there still another one? Oh crap, there's one more. All right, so I guess there's a fourth one here. It's like delete only one character. All right, let's get to it then. Let's solve this one out. Test for test failing. So it passes test failing here. All right, so just say, test failing, right? And then it's gonna call inner function. So I'm skipping over all this stuff here because it's not calling it, so it's not running it right now. It's just declaring it. So I don't need to care about what's happening inside here just yet until it gets called. So I'm just gonna so I know message is test failing because it got passed in as a param. And then I have all this stuff that I'm not looking at yet. And then finally, okay, like here, I need to start looking at in here again because again, we go top down, top, and we don't need to go inside this function because we haven't called it yet. So we just go down until we actually hit this, and then yeah, we're gonna actually call that function now. So we have to look inside that inner func. So inner func gets called with test4 message as the parameter. Now test4 message, again, we can't get it from inside here because we can't go in outside in. But where would this value come from? Any guesses?
At the very top, would
yeah,
it be?
Yeah, exactly. It would just be this. So inside here, message would equal test succeeding. And so basically now we do message equals message. So yeah, this is confusing the way I'm doing it right now just because there's declarations, but let's just try to keep it in comments then. So initially it was test, what got passed in here? Test failing. Okay, so initially it was test failing because it got passed in as a parameter here, test failing. So it got passed in. So here we have where is it? Test failing, right? And then we don't need to care about here. It calls the inner function and it passes it test succeeding, right? So here messages test succeeding. And here we set message to equal message. So I don't think this really does anything because we have message here, and then this message is going to refer to this message, and we're setting it equal to itself. So I still think it's test succeeding here, but this is really confusing. All right, so then again, I can skip over this because it's not running right now. So I'll need to care about it when it runs, when it gets actually invoked. So now it gets invoked here. Double inner is test failing. So, oh my God. So this is gonna be test failing, this message in here. And now we're setting test4 message, which is gonna be this one, to be test failing. All right, so it's gonna be test failing. And then, yeah, we're done with that. So we also called inner function already. So inner function is the one that like set aside this whole chain of events. Now we're done with that, and we're gonna say message equals test4 message, and test4 message is test failing. So that's why it's failing right now, because test4 message, it can't find anything within its local scope, so it goes in the outermost scope and it finds test, but it was initially test succeeding, but now it's test failing because we set it to be test failing in here. When we called inner function, it reassigned that value to be test failing, whatever the output of this function was, and the output of double inner was test failing. So how can we prevent this from happening? I guess maybe if we want to delete a single character, what could we do here? Let me think. All right, so we want to prevent this from happening. test for message equals double inner, or we want to change the result of this somehow. Test for message equals, let's see. There's no conditionals, so I can't change. Let's see. This one's pretty tricky. I feel like I have to like, I mean, if I like remove this character, but then it would be undefined, and I would be setting something to undefined. So I don't think that works. Test for is test failing.
I mean, that's kind of what I did, but not at that spot.
Oh, okay. Message equals test failing. Return test for message. I think you have to stop. I mean, you have to somehow. Test for inner func. You have to somehow stop this from getting reassigned, right? So. Yeah, it's not like popping out to me exactly, because it gets reassigned here, so you need to stop this from happening somehow. But I guess, how would you do that? Message equals message. That's succeeding. Oh. I guess if you like remove one of them, then it'll look for a different one on the outer scope. So when you set message to message, it'll use this message, which is test failing. Yeah, I think you have to do something along the lines of. So the problem is, let me think. So first message will be test failing, and then when you call inner function with test for message of test succeeding, and then when you say message equals message, it'll use the one in test 4, which is that one test failing? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how much you guys are even gaining from this, because I'm just like, there's no real method to the madness here. But again, the main point is basically, like, I think a good thing to note is basically, let's say this was message, then this isn't really doing anything, because I believe you're just reassigning this variable to be itself. But let's say it was, if you like remove this character, so there's no scope of, like, message isn't in its own scope anymore. So then when you declare message, it'll actually be this. It'll actually be test failing. And yeah, like, it won't use this anymore. It'll use the one on the outer level. Not that that really does anything in this case, because you're still just setting it to itself. So maybe
For this one,
Uh-huh.
I think I messed with like the double inner function, or like the test for message equals message. I just deleted like an E from the end of message. And it seemed to
Oh yeah,
work.
like this. Oh
Yeah.
that's a really good idea too. Yeah. I mean, I would say don't worry about if you don't get this, because honestly, like I wouldn't have known that. That's a smart idea. But yeah, I mean, main idea, you know, when you access a variable within a function, it's gonna look first within itself. So in this case, it's gonna use this parameter message. But let's say like it wasn't the case. There was no, you know, it was a different variable name. Then message would now refer to this message and not this one, because it goes outside. It looks one level out. And yeah, I mean, in this case, this wouldn't really do anything because it's just setting the outside message, which is test failing, to be itself. Again, no big help there. But I think it's like a good concept to know. And this is smart to remove this, because then this is what is like the thorn in your side. Like this is the reason why the test is failing, because it reassigns it to be message. And double inner is test failing. So I guess maybe you could do this too, because yeah, I think you could do that too, because if you did this, then it would set message to be, so where would it find this? It can't find this within here, so it finds it here. And this, yeah, I think that's also another approach, is like just remove the one from here. Yeah, because that's not the important thing, is to see how it works, why it's working, because basically before it was message, right? So it was assigning this variable to be message, which is this parameter, which unfortunately for us is test failing, right? So message is going to be test failing because that's the parameter that's getting passed in, and that's what's getting substituted for the value of message. But fortunately, if we do this, then it's going to try to look for message within its own scope, and it can't find it because it's MS and it's not MSG. So it can't find it. So then it looks outer, right? Because it goes inside out. So then it's saying like, oh, like I found a message out here. What is its value? Well, its value is test succeeding. So now we're just assigning this to be this instead of this to be this. But I guess you could also do this too. But yeah, I'm not, did it not give you an error when you did that? Yeah, I guess yeah. Weird. Because this is never declared. So I'm wondering why this doesn't break, but because I would think you would at least need to declare somewhere here, like let test for message or something, because otherwise, unless it gets automatically declared in this, yeah, that's a good idea though. That's a cool thought, but I would think that would break, but I'm not sure why it doesn't, because nothing initializes that variable. So I'm surprised JavaScript could even find that variable. But anywho, I'm sure everyone's tired already. So are there any other questions? I think, otherwise I'll just go on to, were there any other questions on the problems here?
I'm good here.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I'm good here, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, so let's go to arrays then. Arrays are really, really useful because they allow you to hold lists, and that can be very useful. You can think of any e-commerce site or something like urbanoutfitters.com or Amazon, where there's just lists of stuff. Like you could peruse through these giant catalogs of items, and those are all stored in lists somewhere. There's multiple, there's like when you go to shoes, it'll give you the shoe list, and when you go to household products, it'll give you the household products list, and kitchenware list. So lists are everywhere, and that's basically what arrays are. They are a list-like data structure in JavaScript. They can hold any type. So I know we learned about types, numbers, strings, other lists, objects, booleans. It could hold all of those. It can hold variables. So it can hold, right now these are just actual primitive values, but this is a variable. It could represent anything. And we can store all those in arrays, and they could all be mixed. They can all be the same. You're very flexible here. You can remove things, add things to this list. But it's important to be able to group things together, right? Because what if you wanted to, filter by sports? So like you go to Nike.com and like you want to filter by skating shoes versus tennis shoes. Like you need each of those to be in a separate list, and they need to be encapsulated together so that when you ask for them, they come all at once and they're separate from other bundles. So yeah, they're arrays, and whatever's inside of them, they're called elements. And so the type is of object, and that's gonna be a little confusing because objects are also types of objects, and we'll learn about objects, I believe, in 2 days or so. But yes, they are type of object. And so, one might wonder, how would we differentiate between arrays and objects? Well, I think we'll learn that soon. Yeah, this. Array is array. That's really how you can differentiate between an array and an object, is by using this method called array is array. And basically you're asking the array, are you an array?
Mm-hmm.
And it'll tell you. So any guesses what these two statements would log?
I'm not an array. The second one will write that. The first one is an array.
Yeah, but what would it print out to the console? Array.isArray. I think it returns a Boolean value.
Oh, true or false?
Yeah, so it'd be true. The first one would be true, and the second one would be false.
Yeah.
So arrays are cool, right? We can see an entire list of things. But what if you actually want to buy something, and so you request running shoes, and then you get an array of running shoes in the website. And now what if you want to buy the, Adidas Hyper Boost, Ultra Boost shoe, right? So then you click the individual item, and then it'll give you that item in that list. And so how would you access that single item? Because now you want a single thing to act on. So then you just use the square bracket to get the actual item itself. So anyone want to take a stab at what this will output to the console?
It'll come out at the order that they're listed, I guess.
Yep. It'll just be George, John, and Thomas. All right, and the last one's undefined because you're trying to access a property at an index that doesn't even exist in the array. So usually when you try to access something that isn't there, and then you ask him, what is your name? It's usually going to be undefined. All right, so how do we add, like, let's say, uh the inventory guy a shoe at a shoe shop, and now I want to, replace my ultra boosts with um just the classic shoe or something. Then I just want to reassign new values, so I could do something like this where, at the first index I want to, instead of George, I want to put Washington. Instead of John, I want to put Adams. It's the same thing with the shoes. Instead of the Adidas classics or Adidas hype ultra boost, I'll put the Adidas classics. Instead of the Adidas Janoski shoes, I'll replace that with uh, like James Harden's basketball shoe or something. So you can reassign items in a list by using this kind of notation, bracket assignment. So yeah, this would just log Washington, Adams, Jefferson, like the list containing those strings. So in an earlier lecture, it wasn't me, but we had said that only complex times can be mutated. And so that word mutation is a really important word. And basically what that means is like a value can be changed, or the content inside of an array can be changed, as opposed to it not being able to be changed. So for an example of this, we can reassign in arrays, but we can't do that in a string, for example, because once we assign a string to a value, we can't change that. We can create a new string that reflects the changes that we want, but we can't change that string. It's like immutable. It can't be changed. Once it's like a I guess you could think of it as what's something that you can't change once it's made? Like a MacBook. Let's just say, for example, like you can't really make modifications to it. Like when it comes to you, that's how it is. That's how it's gonna be. Like you can't, if you want a better computer, you have to get a new computer. You can't change the one that you got. And that's exactly the same concept. And arrays are more like, let's say, like they're like a car. Like you can I guess you can mutate both of those things, but just for the sake of example, like a lot of people like to, I guess a lot of people also like to boost their computers too, but for Macs, I think that's less common. Like you could add extra RAM to your PCs and stuff, but usually for Macs, I think they're harder to change. And so you can think of that versus like a car that you could, add a bigger engine, or, you could add, make it, I don't know, like you can fix it up somehow. So those are the difference between arrays and strings. And strings are also similar to numbers. Like numbers are also immutable. You can't change them once you set them. So here, when we console log array, it'll be Grace, but when we console log string, it should still be Brace. Because you can't mutate strings. And this is really important because, so let's just go over some examples, because I know this is an important concept, and it's tricky, and I didn't get it for the longest time either. But like it's important because let's say that we had a function called like let age equals 32, right? You can't change this. You can't. The only way you could, I mean, you could reassign it to be an entirely different number,
Mhm.
but you can't ever edit that number. Like it is the way it is, and it can't change. It's immutable. But if you have
Okay.
an array, then it can change. So here you could say, you know, summer clothes. I think you could do this at 3 equals bathing suit or something. And now summer clothes is changed. So you can see it actually updated the value, or I guess there's an empty item because I didn't put it in the right place, but we changed summer clothes, like the value itself was changed. But I can't do that with age. Like I can't do like age at 0 or something, or I can't do age like dot whatever equals something. Like basically if I want to change that, I have to literally do something like age. I have to reassign it to a different number. And at that point, I'm not changing it. I'm just getting a new one. So it's not like I'm changing my existing computer. I'm getting a new computer totally. Whereas here, I'm like actually manipulating the value of this and updating it. And this might not seem important right off the bat because it might just seem like something that, you know, it's a fact, but how important is it for something to be immutable versus not immutable? Well, the important thing is, like, let's say like you had a let me think, a program that told you everything that you did up to that point. So it was like a sort of a log of, you know, all the different states. So like, for example, a Word document, right? And then you know how sometimes in Microsoft Word, you can see all the previous versions? Like it saves all those versions for you. Like how does that work is basically, let's say the state of that document could be represented by an array or an object, right? Let's say like this is just like the state of your object. Well, whenever you make changes to it, you don't change that object. You make a new one with the new updates to it. So then you can have like a catalog. So let's say, you know, you had, for example, let's say you had summer clothes 09, right? And then you had summer clothes 10 equals sandals, tank top, sandals and t-shirt, right? And then summer clothes 10 is 11 is polo. So if after each year you just manipulated this and did like, you know, replaced this with this, then you would have no way of like tracking what happened and like going back in history and seeing like, oh, in 09, what was it? You don't know what it was because you just changed it. Like you went in and you mutated it. So you have no way of knowing like what it was before. Whereas like if you dealt with it immutably, meaning like you created a new array each time, now you have like a history of things that you've done in the past, and like that could be useful, you know? So there are times where immutability helps a lot, because if you just mutate everything and manipulate everything, then it's hard to know like what it was before because you changed it. Whereas like if you just create new versions, then you essentially have snapshots of what the old versions were. So I'm just trying to like bring some practical application to this concept of like immutability and mutability. So yeah, that's kind of like a practical application where if this were immutable, then you don't ever change it. You keep it at the way it was, and that's like a snapshot of what it was at that time, and then you just like edit it by making a new array completely, versus like mutating this and then now you don't know what it was before. Because let's say, you know, you ended up here at your final state of polo and it's summer 11, you have no way of knowing that it was t-shirt before and tank top before or something. So that information could be useful. Yeah, that's a little bit of immutability, and we'll go into more of that when we go into objects too. So again, strings, numbers, booleans, and I mean, I think those are the main like primitive values. Those cannot be mutated, whereas arrays and objects, they can be mutated. So they have a length property, which is built in to the array in JavaScript, where you can access how long it is. And you might want to know this because, you know, let's say you wanted to know how many items are in your cart, because like you're in your shopping cart and you see this little shopping cart and it says like 4, right, on the little icon. How do they know that? They probably do like cart.length, and the cart is an array of all your items. And you just get the length property. So you can also push items into arrays. And essentially this is a mutation. It will mutate the array. It will change it, and you'll be adding something new to it. So, you know, if you have a new kid in class, let's say your class is just an array of kids, then it's the first day of school and someone comes in, and or maybe not the first day of school, but like halfway through the year, a new kid comes, and so you push him into the list. Like you just add him in. So, you know, at first it's just George, John, and Thomas. Now you push James in, and then it's gonna be George, John, Thomas, and James. I guess when the return value of the push is the new length of the array. This is something that I didn't even know, to be honest with you. But these are all things you can find in documentation and things like that. But basically, it's a cool little tidbit.
Can you get specific letters of those names?
Yeah. You mean like G and George?
Or how do you?
Yeah.
How would you change the letter of, like, say you misspelled it or something, you want to change it?
Great question. So let's just like copy this. Right. 'Cause I'm tired of typing. So let's say it was spelled like, you know, mistakes happen, and you want to change this. Well, lucky for us, lists are mutable. We can update the list. We can change the list, mutate it to fit our needs. But we can't change strings. So I'll just put a new string in here. I'll just say name 0 equals George. And that'll fix it. But it's an entirely new string. You can't do something like name 0, which is George, equals like name 0, where, you know, the 0th index, which is going to be G, or it will be 0, 1, 2, so second index, like equals O, or so. You can't do anything. Like you can't do that. Like you just have to create a new string. Like you can't change this item. You have to just reassign it to be an entirely new string. So this and this are totally different. They're not the same string. So yeah, now we have the correctly spelled George. But again, like, if you want to, you know, change a string, you just can't. You just have to create a new string. luckily strings are really easy to make. It's just some characters between two parentheses, so it's not really a big deal.
Now, the opposite way, like say if you wanted to pull letters out of the specific elements, each element, and
Yeah.
would that be something that would be done sometimes, maybe, and be put into some other kind of a variable or something?
Well, if you wanted to pull a name out, then you'd have to do something like you can't change the string, so you have to reassign it. Like if you're saying if there's like a simple way to do it, like there is, but I don't want to get too like complex right now because we're just learning the basics. But if I want to do something, I would do something like let new names equals names dot map name, and then name, and then like, you know, name dot slice 1 or something, and that'll change. Like if you want to like remove everything like quick, there are like little shortcuts you can do and stuff. Like it's not gonna be like always you're gonna have to get every single one like one by one, because there's gonna be like redundant things that you're gonna have to do, and there are gonna be things that you'll learn that will allow you to do things like that. And the cool thing about this is actually this creates an entirely new array. So this is immutable, which we want. Like we don't want to change the existing array because that's gonna cause confusion down the line. Like so the original one is still the same, but I created an entirely new one. So like technically we could like have a history if we wanted to, like, oh, we change it from this to this to this to this. Like I mean, like granted, like this is only gonna be useful in a small subset of cases, but you could do it with this immutable way. But you could also, you know, just do it, just mutate the array too and do it that way.
So I'm noticing that it took off the first, I guess, character of each. I do wonder, like, if you were doing something like that, like, does it, if you were trying to do like 0, 1, 2, like what character would the first character of John be? Because remember when you were fixing, trying to change the array, you put array bracket 0 equals G, and that changed the first character of the, I guess, the George or whatever. For Brace, it was Grace. If you had multiple like names in an array, how would you change maybe just the J in John?
Oh, like then you would just do something like names 1. You mean like within like something like this, like where it goes into each one, and then it like checks, like you can do it in here too. Like you can say like, because this is just a function, so you can say like if name equals John, then do something like then return on. Just only, and this will only else just return the name, and then this will only affect John. So you could like single it out like that, but if you wanted to do it just naively, you could just do names 1 to get the first, to get this one, and then you could just say equals on or something if you wanted to just only mess with John's name, and then that way. But this will mutate the array, but that's fine for now. You could just mutate it. It gives you the same thing.
So I guess map looks at each element in the array then,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and those are just common things that, because like in reality you're gonna want to do things repetitively to each item in the array very commonly, and so they just build those things for you to have a little shortcut, but they're just basically for loops. It's the same thing as doing like let new names equals an empty array, and then for let I equals 0, I equals whatever, and then it like does everything to each item, and then it pushes it into, it does like the push into this array. Like it's kind of like the same thing that's happening, but it's just a function. It's just defined as a function that you can use that's already written out for you, so you don't have to like do it. But if you understand the concept of a for loop, and understand the concept of creating an entirely new array versus like changing an existing array, then you already understand the concept of using maps. But yeah, the important things here, you can't change strings. You can only replace them with entirely new strings. But you can change arrays. You can change items in an array. Let's continue on.
Are you able to change a string to an array?
Yeah. I think it's split. Let me try it. Let name equals mark. I think it's just dot split, I think. Yeah, but it's just like they're just like methods that you can find on the internet where it'll just tell you. And yeah, you could technically like change their name by doing something like this. So then now you could say like, oh, name array at 0 equals D, right? So it just becomes dark, and then you could combine that again into a new name equals name array. I think join is the opposite.
Interesting.
Yeah, slow. But like these are just array methods and string methods that are on documentation, and it'll just tell you. But this is you're still not mutating the string. Like this name and this name are totally different. Like you haven't changed this. You've only created a new string with a new variable, leaving this completely intact. Great questions. So push is something we could just go over real quick. So, summer 20, almost over. But we could, say and now and then you could do it again, and it's essentially mutating this array with new values each time. And when you push something else, it's gonna push it to the back. So it's gonna add it to the, not in the front, but in the back.
Can you just show an example of that?
Yeah, it'll add it to the back. We'll learn about pop next, I think. And that'll just take it off the back. So it's kind of like, you can think of it like a stack of pancakes, where pushing will just stack another layer on, stack one on, stack one on. And then when you pop, it takes off, like you can't pop from the bottom, you've stacked all the top, so you have to eat top down. You have to pop the last one that came in leaves, and then you just pop off. So you can think of it like pancakes, where it just stacks on top of each other when you push, and then when you pop, it'll take the latest one out, and it'll take the latest one out after that. So this will just be pandemic, and then if we had another one that said just overall just it's like wildfires or something, then it'll be pandemic nice weather because the wildfires got popped off. Any guesses as to what this will log out to the console?
It's going to be George, John, and Jefferson.
Yeah, it'll be George, John,
Jefferson,
and then Jefferson will be.
the last one. Okay.
Yeah, wait, let me see. George, John, and then Jefferson. I think Jefferson will be Thomas because.
Yeah, Jefferson will be now Thomas's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you pop something and then you set it equal to something, I think that is what is actually being popped. Wait, let me think. Jefferson's on. Yeah, that is the item that's actually being taken off.
Taken off, yeah.
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 Shift is the same thing as pop, but it removes from the other end, so you could think of it like a line. Instead of a stack of pancakes where the last guy leaves first, it's really like a line where you get in line and the first guy leaves first, and then the second guy leaves second, and the third guy leaves third, and it functions like a line where you're waiting in line for something. And so shift will remove, but it'll remove from the first person that went in. So it'll be like removing the bottom pancake on a stack of pancakes. The one that got there first. It's called shift because when you have to remove the first, everything else has to shift down. And so I guess that's why it's called shift. Any takers at what this would log out to the console?
John Thomas, and then George is removed.
Yeah. Nice. Unshift adds things to the front, so it's just the exact opposite of push. So yeah, pretty intuitive here. We're just adding King George in the front, and new length will be, I guess, 4.
Mm-hmm.
So can you remove as many? One sec. Can you remove as many for shift? Are you able to remove as many elements as you want from the front of the array?
Yeah.
Up until the end of how many? Up until the end of the array, I guess.
Yeah, you can keep doing it until it runs out, and then I'm not sure what happens then, to be honest with you. I'll have to test it out. But yeah, it's as many names as there are in the list, you can shift, and then once you're all done, I think it's just undefined or something when you try to shift. So like if this,
You have to shift multiple times, or can you just shift the whole thing off at once?
I mean, if you wanted to remove delete the array, then you could just say, let's say this was like football teams, and you just want to like destroy the league or something. Like, you got your Eagles and you got your Chiefs and so on. Like if you just wanted to then you could just say just have an empty array. Like if you wanted to, because there's no point of really like shifting all of them off if you just want like an empty array. So but I mean, if you wanted to mutate it in particular, because this is only going to create a new array, if you really want to mutate it, then you could do something like for loop, so you don't have to redundantly call it each time. You just do like 4 however many length in the array, unshift, and that'll decrease the size of your array, and you won't have to repeat too much work, because it's just, you'll just write the code once and it'll just iterate for you.
Can't we say like football.length equals 0?
To like delete it? No, you can't. Like you can't set the length. I think this is illegal. Wait, let me see. If you can, then I had no idea that you could. Yeah, it's not gonna change. Wait, hold on. Let's see 0. Oh, I guess it.
No, you have like two L's on the football, like on the console.log. Take out one of the L.
I guess it works. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had no idea you could do that. I mean, that's interesting. I've never seen it done. So
Wait, are you taking it off or
yeah, I guess
take
so.
them both?
It's all gone. Look, it's an empty array. I guess it'll work if you do 1 too. Yeah. Hey, I did not know that. So I guess you could do that. It's pretty cool.
Why is it showing eagles for 1?
Just
Oh, it's not 1. It's just I'm just logging the array. I set the value of, I mean, I don't think you need to know this because it's not really commonly done, and if you do this, it might be surprising. Like, I mean, you could do it, but it's not like common, so I wouldn't like fret about that. Like if you wanted to mutate this array, I would more recommend like going a conventional approach of doing pop or unshift. If you wanted to remove certain items from the array, like I would just do football.pop.
I think he was asking about the length of 1 versus the index of 1.
Yeah, I wasn't going. This is something you don't like. I wouldn't even bother thinking. I mean, it is cool to know, but I wouldn't think about that because it wasn't like I was. I mean, it's not like I was doing this. It was like resetting the length, which apparently mutates the array too. I had no idea that happens, but I don't think that's important to really know because it's not like, yeah, it's more like you could do things a million different ways. It's not really about knowing how to each of those ways that you can do it. It's like if you know one way, then that's enough for now, and it's more important to try and grasp these concepts versus like, oh, I can do this by using unshift, or I can do this other crazy method on this like thing where it's you can look at them all in the documentation. Like it'll show you all the different like very specific methods on arrays and things like that. And eventually with time, like it'll come to you like the ones that are useful. But I don't think I think it's less important about knowing each of those different things versus yeah, it's having the basic tools and then using those tools in different ways. I think basics is good to focus on for now. So if you wanted to, add something to the front of this, you would do football.unshift. And then you would add the dolphins. And what that would do is that would add dolphins to the front. If you wanted to remove something from the front, then you would just do shift, and you don't need to pass in anything. And now that will just be chiefs because you're removing and adding from the front is shift and unshift. And then pop and push is adding stuff to the end. And if you wanted to do that multiple times, because I could see how it'd be tedious to do that each time, so you could just do it in a loop. So you could just say like for however long this length is, like pop, and that'll consistently give you like a medium by which you could remove items from the array or add them. All right, so we got shift down, unshift, and honestly, like I forget, to be honest, like if it's unshift or shift, so you can just try it. And it's not that important to like memorize, in my opinion, because if it's not shift, then it's probably unshift. Index of is something that's really common. It's important to know this, in my opinion, because it comes up a lot where you want to search for something in an array and see if something exists in a list or a string. It works on both strings and arrays. But we kind of touched upon this method when we were looking for, how many vowels are in a string. Well, in order to find how many vowels are in there, you need to see each character and check it against the list of vowels and say, are you a vowel? So using index of is a way that we could do this. And you want to, so it returns the index at which the item that's passed in as a parameter occurs in the list. The first occurrence. If there's multiple of the exact same item, then it'll only give you the index of the first occurrence. So does anyone want to guess what this will return out to the console?
0.
Yeah. Very nice. How about this?
-1.
Yep. It doesn't exist. That's an easy way to check for existence of something in a list. But it's a shortcut. Like, you guys already knew how to do this using a for loop, right? And that's what it does. In the, if you peel back the layers, index of is just a for loop that loops through the array and takes the parameter that's given and checks equality. Is like it does like is George equals to George, and it's like yes, then return that index of that for loop. So if you know how to use for loops, you're eventually gonna, with enough time spent around coding, you're eventually gonna pick up on these shortcuts, but it's not essential because you just use for loop, do the same thing. Slice is similar as well. So both of these work on strings. You could do this in a string too. So you can say, let A-E-I-O-U. You can just say, vowels dot index of, you can do the same thing. Okay, and this should give you 0. Same thing with arrays. Slice is also the same thing. So slice is when you want part of an array. So let's say you only want the second half of an array or something, and you just want to slice it from index to index. So the first index is where you start, like where you want to start slicing, and the second parameter is where you want to finish slicing. So I believe this will get you, I honestly, to this day, I get mixed up, like whether it includes one or excludes, like I'm not sure, but we'll figure it out. We'll see. I'm gonna guess that this will be John, but it could very well be John Thomas. So let's just see. Yeah, I guess it's John. And the cool thing about slice is it works immutably, meaning it creates an entirely new array. It doesn't affect the existing array. So that's pretty awesome, because let's say even without that very small case of, yeah, I need to know my history of all the things that I've done before so that I can like save and like build this really robust application that allows users to see their previous work at this exact moment in time and then restore it, which is like awesome for the user, right? But there's a lot of times where that's not going to be really necessary for you to do. So another reason why working immutably is helpful is because, let's say a lot of times you have, let's say you had presidents, and then let's start with George Washington, and then I'm really like, who does anyone know who the second president was? I'm like blanking right now. Is it
John Adams.
Is it John Adams? Okay. I'm like, so like that was embarrassing, but let's say we had our presidents. Let's do one more. Does anyone know the third? Who's the third president? Thomas Jefferson? Wow. Okay, so we have our 3 presidents, and so let's say have this function called like get third president or something. and let's say I just did something like let third president equals presidents dot pop, because I was just lazy and I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna mutate my array, like whatever, who cares. But now, you know, let's say this is a giant file and there's a bunch of functions and it's like kind of hard to read, and like this is all the way at the bottom and like you don't know what's happening, and then you make a function called like get second president, and you're like, yeah, like this is what it is. Like this declaration of this array is how I'm going to expect it to be. I'm not gonna, I can't assume that something else is gonna get called and like mutate this array, and so this function is gonna get called like somewhere down here where I can't even see it or something. You know, it gets called, and then now what I'm working with is actually this, because that function got called and it got mutated, and like now I'm dependent on that, and like somebody else changed it, so like, you know what I mean? Like it gets really not conducive to clarity and simplicity when you start mutating stuff. How much better would it have been if I left this alone as it was and left this list? You know, when you declare something, usually it's wise to just leave it at that, and if you want to pull values from it or like do stuff to it, just make a new version of it, make a copy of it, and don't change the original one. Because if you change the original one, now someone else that came into this code base, you wrote this code and you popped off of it, and then like now some other function is gonna get called somewhere else, and now, you know, you're looking at something that's not accurate, if that makes sense. So that's another reason why you should always try and favor immutable styles of working. But I mean, like right now, it's really about just getting the problem correct, and you know, whether or not you use pop or push, it's fine to do either. But I'm just trying to give examples of like why this concept is even important, and it is really important.
I understand what you're saying, that we shouldn't randomly mutate the array willy-nilly.
Yeah.
But just as far as this example, would it still work because the function get second president is happening before the get third president function that pops the second?
Yeah, I think so, because once it's declared, well, I guess it depends on when it runs, actually. Wait, actually that's a good it's a little experiment that we could try out, because I'm wondering if it gets it when it's declared. No, I don't think so. I think it's whenever it's called. So if you call this function first and then you call second president, then it'll be changed. So in here, presidents is, it doesn't have Thomas Jefferson because you popped first. But if you did it this way, then I believe it'll be right. Yeah. So it depends on the order of when that pop happens. That.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
So it's already bad. You know what I mean? Like, why should it depend on the order? Like, it shouldn't depend on the order. So it's already a busted program, in my opinion, and it shouldn't. It should, you know. What should have happened is you could just say, instead of popping, you could just say, I mean, in this case, it's really simple of just getting that index and leaving the precedence the way it is. But that takes us back to slice, because slice doesn't change the original array. So as you can see here, we sliced off the middle item by doing 1 and 2. So I guess 2 is exclusive and 1 is inclusive. So whatever this first index is, it'll include that, and then whatever this last index is, it'll exclude that. So that's why it's confusing, because like one is different than the other. But when you do slice, it like takes this, it slices here, and it gives you this item right here, John. But it doesn't affect the original array. So when you log the original array, it didn't actually slice off the original array, it just made a new array. So yeah, inclusive, exclusive. So how would we get fourth president. James Madison. Okay. So, anybody want to suggest how I could get John Adams and Thomas Jefferson if I only wanted those two?
Okay, you can do president that slice,
Uh-huh.
index 1,
Uh-huh.
and then slash
Oh, shit.
1, 2, 3, 3. I think 3.
Yeah.
No, 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. Yes, 3.
Yeah, it's 3. I think it's 3. Yeah. And what's cool is that presidents is still intact. So no changes to presidents. Presidents is still the same as it always was. But now you just sliced off a piece that you care about and left the rest intact. So yeah, slice is cool. So let's say, I wanted to do a bunch of mutations because they're, simple to work with and I just want to work with it. So let's say, I have presidents, right? And then let's say I want to let my favorite presidents, right? And then I want to start off with like the entirely the same list of presidents and then like work my way and like whittle down and narrow down from all the presidents till only the ones that I like. Like, how would you make a copy of this exact array? Well, you could just say let my favorite presidents equals presidents dot slice with nothing. And what that does is that just makes a carbon copy of the original one without so now if I just did like my favorite presidents dot push does anyone want to guess? I mean, basically this will be intact. This will still be the same. It's not gonna push into this. It'll be left intact, but I will be mutating this new array, which is an entirely new array, but it's a copy of this array.
Then someone roll will be at the end.
Yeah, so it'll just be a copy, and then I just added one more to it. It's also useful sometimes when you want to make copies of stuff. Alright, that's slice for us. Same with strings. Same thing with strings. So yeah, I guess this is showing us the copy version where essentially you slice. Does anyone want to guess what names would be in this case? Names and names copy.
We do the same thing as names.
Yeah. Names would be the same as names. What about names copy?
Same thing.
No, it wouldn't, because you have 8 and
Oh,
9.
okay,
Mine's 8 and
okay.
9.
I see what you're doing.
Plus Ringo. Ace plus Ringo.
Yep, it would have
Okay.
It would have Ringo in it, but
But it will replace John
Thomas.
with Paul. No, I'm sorry, Thomas with Paul.
yeah, nice. Yep, it would replace. So it'd be George, John, Paul, and Ringo.
Yeah.
I'm covering this with the Paul with my. Can move this. It's not in a good place. Oh crap. There it is. Includes will take a value and return true if the value is an element in the array. So you do array dot like a sample array dot include something, and it'll say, it'll give you true or false if it exists. Anyone want to guess what this would output?
True.
Yep, true. How about this?
False.
Yep, So reverses the original array, but it actually like mutates it. But I mean, we could also reverse by doing a for loop and then looping from the top, from the end to the start, and then just building up the string or array like that. So we could do it like that too, or we could just use reverse. Keep in mind, reverse will change the actual original array. So names will be this array, but in reverse order. Those are arrays. We'll go into arrays more next week and learn about also objects, and then learn how, you know, they can be used together really effectively. Learn about the differences between objects and arrays, because they can do very similar things, but they're also like tools in a toolbox. So, you know, you could use a hammer as a wood cutter. You could just smash like a piece of wood. Instead of using a woodcutter, you could use a hammer. But a hammer would be much more suited to do different things. So we'll learn how arrays and objects are kind of like hammers and woodcutters, where one's really good for something and another's really good for something else, and they could kind of do the similar thing, but they kind of have their own uses. That's it.